This spot Bitcoin ETF update is presented by Grayscale, the world's largest crypto asset manager. With the spotlight on the potential for a spot ETH ETF this year, CoinDesk's managing editor of global policy and regulation, Nick Day, joins us now to talk about the legal path ahead. Nick, welcome back to First Mover. I have missed you dearly.
Good to be back.
All right. It took 10 years to get the spot Bitcoin ETF approved. Now, the industry is very hopeful for a spot ETH ETF this spring, summer. What's your perspective there? What are folks saying to you?
It seems that people are, I would say, more optimistic than not about the chances of a spot ETH ETF getting approved. The date to look out for is late May. So you have a couple months left of filings and whatnot. But in the next, I would say, couple of weeks, we should start to see the flurry of activity that preceded the spot Bitcoin ETF approval. And that's really what's going to tell us, if we start seeing uh, issuers or would-be issuers start to update their filings and, all those small little ways that the spot Bitcoin ETF issuers were right before that approval in January, then that'll probably be a really good sign that it is going to happen, or it's more likely to happen at least once we get to that May, I think it's 29th deadline.
Now, spot ETH ETF issuers are reportedly supposed to meet with the SEC this month. Tell me a little bit more. What can we expect from these meetings? Is it going to be very similar to what we saw with the Bitcoin ETFs?
Well, that's what, what we're keeping an eye out for is, if after these meetings, we start seeing the issuers start to add little details about, the fees and the custodians and all those little things that, uh, we saw with the Bitcoin ETF applications, then it shows that there is dialogue happening, that the dialogue is progressing. If we start seeing tickers added, if we start seeing the various, parties that are going to be supporting the ETFs being disclosed, um, all of those are the those details that we'll be you know hopefully seeing or not seeing, as the case may be.
Now, Nick, could it be a little bit more complicated? Could the question come up of whether ETH is a security or not, that thus making this application a little bit more complicated than the Bitcoin application was?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked before about how the SEC views certain cryptocurrencies. ETH has been kind of in this weird place where we know that at least pre-merge, before it was on this proof of stake consensus algorithm, um, it was pretty much accepted as not being a security. Post merge, now that it moved to proof of stake, it's been a little bit more unclear, I would say, where you have SEC Chair Gary Gensler not outright stating, but suggesting that it is perhaps more likely to be a security now. We haven't seen ETH mentioned in any of the lawsuits that the SEC has brought against crypto exchanges. So the cases against Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, and Binance US, they don't mention ETH. They do mention other cryptocurrencies as being securities or unregistered securities in the SEC's view. And the fact that we haven't seen ETH, honestly, it's hard to say what to make of that. But what is likely to happen if the SEC rejects the ETH ETFs, especially if they say, well, we think this might be an unregistered security, it's probably the same thing we saw when the SEC rejected the Grayscale Bitcoin ETF conversion application, meaning, someone's going to sue. And that's when, if that happens, that's when I think we'll probably start seeing a lot more about, just that discussion of whether or not ETH is a security in the SEC's view.
Now, I'm curious if you think that the ETH Futures ETF is going to come up in the conversation here. When that was approved, we had analysts on First Mover say that this kind of solidifies ETH as a commodity and not a security. But like you've just mentioned, Nick, it's kind of murky waters. Do you think that that's going to come up as we anticipate an approval in May?
I would be really surprised if it doesn't. Certainly, if the SEC decides to reject a spot Ether ETF for any reason, we're going to see a lawsuit, and they're going to make the same argument that Grayscale made, which is how are you able to approve a futures Ether ETF, which has the same underlying data, the same pricing data, based on the same underlying asset, if you are going to reject spot Ether product. So um, yeah, the argument is going to be it's either the same, you can't argue market manipulation. We saw how that worked out with the Bitcoin ETF, lawsuit. Maybe you can say, oh, it's a security, but it still raises the same question. So just the fact that the fact that it is a thing is going to make it a lot more difficult, I think, for the SEC to reject a spot Ether ETF application or several without us going through the same rounds of legal filings, lawsuits, and I mean without I'm not going to predict what the lawsuits are going to result in, but I would say the chances are pretty good that a court of appeals is going to make a similar argument or similar decision to when the Bitcoin ETF applications were being fought over.
All right, we are going to keep an eye on what's going on with the spot ETH ETFs. And Nick, hopefully we'll have you back as there are more legal developments. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
That was CoinDesk's managing editor of global policy and regulation, Nick Day.